Hello everyone, my name is Rosa Avila, and now I will be discussing Section B of the Fruit Chemical Use Survey. This section will focus on the specific crop commodities and the acreage. Before I go into further details, I will go ahead and review an outline of what will be included in this training. So we will be discussing the inclusion and exclusion criteria for the fruit acreage, the target crops and their commodity codes, information for enumerators to include within Section B, and we will review a few examples of how this section should be completed correctly. We will also review how to fill out California's questionnaire Section B. There are some slight differences in the California version. So the inclusion criteria includes target crops only. Please remember that when completing the report, make sure that you reference the list of target crops for the specific state. Now for those target crops, we want to make sure that we include all commercial bearing acreage equal to or greater than 1/10 of an acre, all bearing acreage of target crops for roadside stands, farmers markets, and U-pick sales. Also include bearing acreage not harvested due to weather, economic, or other reasons. If this is the case, please make sure that you provide us a comment so that we are aware that the crop was not harvested. But make sure to include the information too. Also include crops planted in the fall of 2024 if they were part of the 2025 crop. Now, we also want to discuss the exclusion criteria within Section B, such as we want to exclude all crops grown in another state. So make sure that you're only collecting the information for the specific state. All crops grown in greenhouses, hothouses, and home gardens. If the operator tells us that their fruit crops, even if they're target crops, are not intended for commercial sales and are for personal use only, considered a home garden, then make sure you provide us a comment and not include the information in the acreage table. We also want to exclude any plantings of crops not intended to be harvested in 2025. Also exclude new plantings and other plantings which are not yet bearing. So if the plants are young, not of bearing age, we would exclude them. Also, make sure that we exclude all fruits grown for commercial transplanting. And we exclude all fruits that are grown by institutional, experimental, research, and university farms. If you come across one such operation, please provide a record comment to be referenced in future surveys. And again, as a quick reminder, please make sure that we're excluding non-target fruits. If the operation has reported to us that they grow other fruits that are not listed as a target crop, you could always include a comment in the report, but do not include it in the acreage table. So here is a list of the target crops and the crop codes for the states of Florida, New York, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Texas. And here we have a list of the target crops and their codes for the states of Georgia, Michigan, New Jersey, Oregon, Pennsylvania, and Washington. For all of these states, there were no changes to the target commodity crops compared to the previous cycle of the Fruit Chemical Use Survey, which was conducted in 2023. Now, moving on to page 6. This question is really asking about which target fruit were included as part of the planted acres during the 2025 crop year. There are 15 lines available to enter the crop name information, the appropriate crop code, the number of acres planted for harvest in 2025, and if they were either sprayed with herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, or other type of pesticides applied to the crop. If specific additional details are needed to describe the crops, please make sure to use the notes section that's provided at the bottom of the page and include any details that could help us explain the information that was reported. So here's an example for you. So in 2025, a farmer from Pennsylvania grew and harvested apples and peaches on their 200-acre property. There were 160 acres of apples and 40 acres of peaches. Furthermore, no pesticides were applied for either the apples nor the peaches. So how would you fill out Section B of this questionnaire? Based on the crops for a non-California state, this is how you would complete Section B of the questionnaire. Notice that we would enter the different crops in separate lines. We would record the crop name, crop code, number of bearing acres that were intended to be harvested in 2025. And finally, we would also enter a 3 on column 4 to indicate that no chemicals were applied. Remember, the example was that in 2025, a farmer from Pennsylvania grew and harvested apples and peaches on 200 acres. There were 160 acres of apples and 40 acres of peaches, and no pesticides were applied to either of those crops. So this is the correct way to complete the acreage table for this example. Now we will discuss the California's version of Section B. So shown here is a table of California's crop codes, which are included at the bottom of page 6 of the questionnaire. The crop codes are the same as the other states or regions, but compared to 2023, this year, the commodity crop dates were removed from California's list of target crops. So those who have worked on this survey before, if you worked on this survey in 2023, you'll notice that we're no longer collecting data for dates. For the acreage table, there are slight differences on the California version. This version includes column 5 and column 6, which ask which date they completed the harvest for the 2024 and 2025 crop year, respectively. The 2-digit month, day, and year would be entered in both column 5 and column 6. This allows us to have a time frame for when the operation's chemical applications were specific to the 2025 crop year. Now on page 7 of the California version, we have an extension of the acreage table. Here we record the California EPA site location numbers when they're required. These site location numbers are only required when the operation either shares their pesticide ID or uses multiple pesticide IDs. The pesticide ID information would be reported on page 3, which is the California screening page. More information regarding this is provided on the trainings for the face page and screener section, as well as the California Survey Differences training section. Now here's another example, and this one is for the state of California. In 2025, a California farmer grew and harvested peaches, Valencia oranges, and wine-type grapes on their 200-acre property. There were 60 acres of peaches, 69 acres of Valencia oranges, and 71 acres of wine-type grapes. No pesticides were applied to the peaches or the wine-type grapes. However, pesticides were applied to the Valencia oranges. Also, specific dates were provided for each crop, except for peaches in 2025, as they were not harvested due to poor crop quality. How would you fill out Section B of this questionnaire? So this is how we would enter the information in the acreage table. We would enter the name of the crops, their specific crop codes, whether they sprayed the crop, and the 2024 and 2025 end harvest dates. For peaches, notice that we left the 2025 harvest date blank. This will require a comment to confirm that this was left blank on purpose and not by mistake. This in the past has been a big issue, so please make sure that you provide us a comment when the crop was not harvested on purpose. Now on the Valencia oranges, notice that we have entered a 1 on column 4 to indicate that chemicals were sprayed on that crop. Also, notice that the harvest dates for the Valencia oranges were quite apart from one another for 2025 compared to 2024. Since the harvest was more than 2 months apart from a whole calendar year, please verify that this was reported correctly, as it's usually rare that there's such quite a gap from the common harvest practices for the operation. And provide a comment. The same will be required from us, NAS reviewers, during the data review to justify the date discrepancy. Now on wine type grapes, the data was recorded using the appropriate grape variety crop code. The table has been completed assuming that no pesticide site location numbers were required on page 7. Again, more information on site locations is provided on the California Survey Differences training section. But for now, we will review one such example next. So this is an example of an operation which uses more than one pesticide ID. Knowing this, they're already expected to report the EPA site location numbers on page 7. Additionally, this operation also shares at least one of the pesticide IDs, which is a second reason why they should report the EPA site location numbers. Either of these requirements indicates that the EPA site locations should be reported. In this example, the operation uses 2 IDs starting with 54, which pertain to Tulare County. But the second ID is used to spray the fields in Fresno County. This is quite common, to use an ID from one county to spray in an adjacent county. So a quick note for yourself could help you keep track of this. Now from the same example, regarding how to complete the California acreage table, we want to make sure that we complete the EPA site location numbers, which were required for this example. Remember that there were 2 IDs used on this operation, and at least one of those IDs was also shared with another operation. So that is why we would be completing this information. Now, to keep track of the complete list of the acres and the site locations, for this example, the enumerator first collected all the data for one pesticide ID, then collected the data for the second pesticide ID. This also helps prevent double reporting of the acres. The breakup by pesticide ID is not required, but would help the enumerator account for all the correct site locations per target crop. Now here in this example, notice that line 03 of the EPA site locations did not fit all the site location numbers. Therefore, the remaining site was added to the line below. The line number, which was 04, was crossed out and corrected to show 03 to indicate that the additional site belongs with line 03. Other number lines were also adjusted. The only recommendation that I would have to make this table ready for keying purposes would be to not skip any rows. For keyed reports, this could be an issue in the tool used for data review. Otherwise, this is a perfect example of how the site locations data should be recorded. If you have any additional information that could help us during our review, please write this as a comment on the paper form in the margins, such as shown in this example. So now I would like to take some time to include some common questions that we have for Section B and as also common errors that we see in Section B. So one common error is substituting names of non-target crops on forms